In front of the entire medical team, Dr. Marcus Hale raised his hand and slammed it against the clipboard Claire was holding. The impact was so strong that the papers flew down the hallway and she nearly lost her balance. No one moved. No one said a word. She lowered her head, gathered each sheet from the floor, and returned to work in silence, as if it were normal. Then the stretcher arrived, and with it, a patient Dr. Hale and his entire team couldn't save. What happened in the next 90 seconds made everyone in that hallway realize he had publicly struck the most lethal and most qualified woman in that entire hospital. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from today. I want to know who's out there. If this story hits you the way I think it will, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Welcome to Secrets of Silent Badges. This one will stay with you. The first thing people noticed about her was that she apologized too much. Sorry. Coming through. Sorry, I need that chart. Sorry to bother you. Always sorry. Always small. She moved through the corridors of Mercy General like someone trying not to take up space. Shoulders curved inward, badge clipped crooked on her chest. A loose strand of dirty blonde hair falling across her face every few minutes because she never quite got the bun right in the morning. Her name tag said Claire Mercer, RN. Most of the staff had stopped reading it after the first week. She was just the new one, the volunteer. The woman in the oversized scrubs who showed up before dawn, left after dark, and never complained about the assignments nobody else wanted. She had been at Mercy General for 11 days. Nobody knew why she was there. Nobody asked. That was exactly how she wanted it. The ER at Mercy General hit different at 6 in the morning. The overnight chaos hadn't fully cleared yet. A homeless man with a laceration on his scalp was still waiting in Bay 4. 2 nurses were arguing quietly near the medication station, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with that particular frequency that made tired people feel 10 years older. Claire moved through it all without making a sound. She checked vitals on the man in Bay 4, noted his blood pressure, wrote it down. His name was Gerald. He had a dog named Biscuit that he worried about more than himself. She knew this because she had asked the night before, and he had talked for 40 minutes while she cleaned his wound. She had not been assigned to Gerald. She had simply noticed that nobody else was talking to him. Mercer. The voice came from behind her, sharp. The kind of voice designed to carry across rooms so that everyone could hear who was being addressed and understand immediately that it was not a conversation. It was a summons. She turned around slowly. Dr. Marcus Hale was 34 years old, board certified in emergency medicine, and the kind of man who wore his credentials the way some men wore expensive watches, not because they needed to tell time, but because they needed you to notice. He was tall, handsome in a structured, deliberate way. His white coat was always pressed. His hair was always neat. He had the posture of a man who had been told he was exceptional so many times that he had simply begun to believe it as a biological fact. He was holding a clipboard. Her clipboard, she realized. The one she had left at the nurse's station with the overnight notes she had compiled. "What is this?" he said. She walked toward him. "Overnight vitals for patients in bays 1 through 6. I also flagged 2 cases that might need follow-up imaging based on... I didn't ask for your analysis." He held the clipboard up, tilting it so she could see the pages she had filled out. "I asked what this is. Because what I'm looking at is a volunteer nurse who apparently thinks her job is to play doctor." Several people had stopped moving. A resident near the coffee machine had gone very still. 2 nurses at the far end of the corridor were watching. Claire kept her voice even. "I wasn't playing anything. I just noticed some patterns in the overnight data that seemed worth..." "Patterns." He said the word the way you'd say something you found on the bottom of your shoe. "You've been here 11 days, Mercer. 11 days. I have been practicing emergency medicine for 9 years, so let me be very clear with you about something." He stepped closer. Not close enough to be written up, close enough to be felt. "Your job is to follow orders, not to generate opinions, not to flag things, not to think. Do we understand each other? She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked down. Yes, doctor. He held out the clipboard. She reached for it. What happened next took less than a second. His hand came forward with more force than a handoff required. The clipboard connected with her palm at an angle, hard enough that the metal clip edge caught her fingers, and the whole thing spun out of her grip. Papers exploded outward. Charts, notes, the overnight vital sheets she had spent 2 hours compiling, all of it, airborne, and then scattered across 40 feet of corridor floor. The impact was loud in the way that silences things. Everyone in earshot went completely still. Hale looked at the papers on the floor, then at her. Something flickered across his face, not quite regret, but awareness. The awareness of a man who had just done something in public and was now calculating whether it would cost him anything. He decided it wouldn't. "Clean that up," he said. "Then come find me when you have something worth my time." He walked away. Claire stood in the middle of the hallway. She could feel everyone watching her. The resident by the coffee machine, the 2 nurses at the far end, Gerald in Bay 4, who had raised himself up on one elbow to see what the noise was. She crouched down. She began collecting the papers one by one, in order. And here is what nobody in that corridor noticed, because nobody was looking closely enough. Her hands did not shake. Most people, after something like that, have some kind of visible reaction, a tremor, a flush, quickened breathing, the body's automatic accounting for the adrenaline that a public humiliation dumps into the bloodstream. Claire Mercer's hands were absolutely still, not rigid, not clenched. Still, the way deep water is still. Not because nothing is happening underneath, but because the surface has been trained not to show it. She stacked the papers, aligned the edges, reclipped the board with the efficiency of someone who had organized things under conditions that made this hallway look like a meditation retreat. She stood up. "He does that a lot," said a voice beside her. A nurse named Donna had appeared at her elbow. 50s, short dark hair, the kind of face that had absorbed a lot of the world's nonsense without losing its warmth. She spoke quietly, eyes already moving back to her own work, so it didn't look like a conversation. "Hale," Donna continued.
"He does that. The clipboard thing, the chart thing, the you don't belong here thing. He did it to the last 3 volunteers. 2 of them quit." Claire looked at the papers in her hands. "What happened to the 3rd?" she asked. Donna almost smiled. "She filed a formal complaint. HR buried it in 48 hours. Hale's uncle is on the board."
Claire nodded slowly. "Good to know," she said. She went back to work. By 9 in the morning, she had taken 3 blood draws, assisted in a shoulder reduction, changed 4 dressings, and talked a 62-year-old man named Arthur out of leaving the ER before his cardiac workup was finished. Arthur had a tendency to argue. Claire had let him argue for exactly 90 seconds, and then said something quietly that made him sit back down and stop talking. Donna, passing in the hallway, had tried to hear what it was. She couldn't make it out. Whatever it was, it worked. That was the other thing about Claire Mercer that people noticed without quite cataloging it. She had a way of speaking in certain moments, not loudly, not aggressively, that simply ended discussions, a quality in the voice that bypassed whatever argument a person was building and reached something older and more instinctive. People responded to it before they knew they were responding. It was not a skill you learned in nursing school. At 9:47, she was in the break room eating half a granola bar when she took her medication. She did it efficiently, the way she did everything. A small orange prescription bottle from her jacket pocket. 2 pills, a sip of water. The bottle back in her pocket before the water bottle was set down. She sat for a moment after. Just a moment. Her eyes went to the window. Outside, the city was doing what cities do in the morning, moving, loud, indifferent to any individual within it. She watched a pigeon land on the fire escape opposite and immediately begin investigating something with deep professional interest. Something in her expression shifted. Not sadness. Not quite. Something more complicated. The look of a person doing math, weighing things against each other, calculating a sum that keeps coming out the same no matter how many times you run it. She put the granola bar down. She stood up. She went back to work. At 10:15, Dr. E. Hale was in Bay 3 telling a second-year resident named Kowalski exactly what he had done wrong with a patient assessment, using the specific tone reserved for people who want to teach a lesson and embarrass someone at the same time. Claire passed the bay doorway without stopping. She clocked the situation in her peripheral vision without turning her head. Patient in Bay 3, male, mid-40s, presenting with chest pain. Hale was focused on Kowalski. The patient himself was sitting on the edge of the gurney, listening to both men argue about his body as though he were a car that had been brought in for disputed repairs. She slowed her walk almost imperceptibly. Her eyes went to the patient's hands, the slight bluish tinge at the fingernails, the set of his jaw, not fear, but the particular flatness of someone who had been in pain long enough to start organizing themselves for a different outcome. She walked 3 more steps past the doorway, stopped, turned back, stood in the doorway for a moment with her clipboard. "Dr. Hale," she said. He turned. The expression on his face at the sight of her was the specific kind of neutral that people deploy when they want to communicate contempt without technically doing anything reportable. "Mercer, I'm in the middle of something." His oxygen saturation dropped 2 points in the last 6 minutes, she said. His nail beds are showing peripheral cyanosis, and the way he's holding his left arm against his body, not guarding the chest, guarding the shoulder, is consistent with referred pain from a cardiac event, rather than musculoskeletal. Silence. Kowalski looked at the patient, then at Hale. Hale looked at Claire. The look on his face was a specific combination of irritation and the involuntary recognition of someone who has just been told something they cannot immediately dismiss. He turned back to the patient without a word to her. "Run a 12 lead, he said to Kowalski. Claire was already walking away before he finished the sentence. At 11:50, the doors of Mercy General's trauma bay burst open. 2 paramedics, 1 gurney, moving fast. The man on the gurney was enormous, 6'3" at least. 240 pounds of muscle that was currently being undermined by the GSW entrance wound just below his right clavicle and the amount of blood that had made it through the field dressing and was now making its opinion known on the white sheets. "GSW to the upper chest," the lead paramedic called out. He was conscious at scene. "Went out 2 minutes ago. No exit wound. BP's tanking. 60/40 on approach. Airway compromised." The trauma team mobilized. Hale came in from the side corridor, already pulling on gloves, already in the mode that was his best mode. The emergency, the chaos, the place where his particular kind of sharp made sense. Claire was at the nurse's station when it happened. She heard the doors. She heard the paramedics report. She turned, and something changed in her face. Not panic, the opposite of panic. A specific, total, absolute stillness, the kind that appears in people who have spent years in places where panic costs lives, and have trained it out of themselves so completely that it now lives in the same part of the brain as breathing. She looked at the man on the gurney. She looked at the wound. She looked at the monitors as they were connected. The numbers coming up wrong, too wrong, the kind of wrong that had a very short window attached to it. She took 1 step toward the trauma bay. Then she stopped herself. She stood at the edge. She watched. Her hands, at her sides, were completely still. And the expression on her face, if anyone had been looking, if anyone had been paying enough attention to the volunteer nurse standing at the perimeter of a trauma response she had not been invited into, was not the expression of a bystander. It was the expression of someone calculating the exact moment they were going to have to stop watching and start working. The clock above the trauma bay read 11:52 a.m. The man on the gurney had minutes, possibly fewer, and Claire Mercer had not moved yet. The man on the gurney did not have a name yet. That would come later. The wallet, the next of kin, The paperwork that turns a body in crisis back into a person with a history and people who love him. Right now, he was just a set of numbers going in the wrong direction. BP, 5840, heart rate, 121. O2 sat, 84 and falling. Hale was at the head of the gurney, calling orders. His voice was controlled, efficient. This was the version of Marcus Hale that the hospital had hired. The one who functioned well inside chaos, who could prioritize fast and delegate faster. 2 large-bore IVs, wide open. Type and cross, CBC, BMP. Get me a chest x-ray now. Someone call cardiothoracic. The team moved. Claire did not move. She stood 6 feet from the trauma bay entrance, her clipboard pressed against her chest, and she watched. She watched the way Hale's hands moved over the wound site. Competent, yes, but searching. The hesitation of a man who understood what he was seeing but had not yet decided what it meant. She watched the monitors. O2 sat, 81. She counted the seconds between the patient's breaths. Too shallow, too fast. The chest rising unevenly. The right side doing most of the work. The left side lagging behind by just enough to mean something terrible. She knew exactly what it meant. She had known since the paramedics called it at the door. No exit wound. GSW below the right clavicle. BP tanking despite no visible external hemorrhage significant enough to explain the drop. Breath sounds. She couldn't hear them from here, but she could see the chest wall movement, and what she saw told her what the stethoscope was about to confirm for Hale. Tension pneumothorax. The bullet had nicked the lung. Air was leaking into the pleural space with every breath, building pressure, collapsing the lung, pushing the heart sideways in the chest cavity. Every second that pressure built, the heart had less room to beat. The blood pressure would keep falling. The heart rate would spike and then crash. And then there would be nothing left to do. She had seen it before. She had fixed it before. In places that made this trauma bay look like a living room. Hale called for the chest x-ray again. Someone said the portable machine was being used in Bay 7. Hale said something under his breath. Kowalski appeared at the edge of the bay with a stethoscope, moving toward the patient. O2 sat, 78. Claire's right hand moved. It dropped from the clipboard and found the edge of the trauma bay doorframe. Her fingers pressed into the metal. She was calculating. Not the medicine. She had finished calculating the medicine 40 seconds ago. She was calculating something else. The cost of staying outside. The cost of going in. What it would mean. What it would expose. What it would start that she had worked very hard, for a very specific set of reasons, to prevent from starting. She thought about the orange prescription bottle in her jacket pocket. She thought about the reason she was here, in this hospital, in this city, in these oversized scrubs with her hair half falling out of a bun. She had never needed to learn to do properly, because for 14 years, her hair had been short enough that it didn't matter. She thought about what her doctor had told her 8 weeks ago, and then she looked at the man on the gurney. He was young. She hadn't registered that at first. The size of him had read as age, the way large people sometimes do. But now, with the trauma lights full on his face, she could see it. 26, maybe 27. The kind of young that still had something unfinished about it. A jaw that hadn't fully settled. A crease on his left hand where a ring might have been recently. The skin still slightly pale from where it had blocked the sun. She looked at the monitors. O2 sat. 74. Heart rate, 134. Hale had the stethoscope now. He was listening to the left side of the chest. She watched his face. Watched the moment the sound, or the absence of sound, registered. She watched him understand, and then she watched him look at the tray, and she watched him hesitate. Not long. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But she had spent 14 years in environments where 2 seconds was the difference between a man who went home and a man who didn't, and she felt those 2 seconds like a physical thing pressing against her sternum. She let go of the doorframe. She walked in. Nobody stopped her. She moved to the left side of the gurney, opposite Hale, without asking permission and without explaining herself, and she picked up the 14-gauge angiocath from the instrument tray with the particular grip of someone who has picked up a 14-gauge angiocath in the dark, in the rain, in the back of a moving vehicle, in conditions that had no name in any civilian medical textbook. Hale looked up. "Mercer, what are you—" "Tension pneumo," she said. "Left side. He needs decompression now, not after the x-ray." "I'm aware of—" "His SAT is at 74. You have about 90 seconds before this becomes a different conversation." The words came out flat. Not aggressive, not emotional. The tone of someone reading coordinates off a map. Hale stared at her. Around the bay, everything had gone very quiet. He looked at the monitor. He looked at the patient. He looked at the needle in her hand. Something moved across his face that she did not watch long enough to identify. "Do it," he said. She was already doing it. Her left hand found the landmarks without looking. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. The precise geography of a procedure she had performed so many times that her hands knew it the way other people's hands knew how to type or drive. She cleaned the site in one motion. The needle went in at a 90-degree angle, controlled, steady, advancing until she felt the resistance change. The hiss was immediate, a sharp, pressurized release of trapped air, the sound of a lung remembering what it was supposed to do. On the monitor, the O2 sat climbed, 74, 78, 83, 89. The heart rate began to fall back from its panicked peak. The blood pressure, still low, began its slow stabilization. The man on the gurney took a breath, a real one. Both sides of his chest rising together for the first time since he'd come through those doors. Nobody in the trauma bay said anything. Claire stepped back from the gurney. She set the angiocath assembly down on the tray. She looked at the monitor for 3 more seconds, confirming what she already knew. Then she looked at Hale. His face was unreadable. He was staring at her with an expression she had seen before, not on doctors, but on soldiers. On men who had just watched someone do something that rearranged their understanding of the room they were standing in. "You need a chest tube next," she said. "And cardiothoracic should be scrubbed in before you go looking for the bullet. The trajectory from the entry wound puts it close to the subclavian." She picked up her clipboard from the edge of the tray where she had set it. She turned to leave. "Mercer." She stopped, did not turn around. "Where did you learn that?" Hale asked. The trauma bay was absolutely silent. The monitors beeped. The young man breathed. Claire stood with her back to the room for exactly 2 seconds. "Nursing school," she said, and she walked out. The chest tube went in at 12:31 p.m. Cardiothoracic arrived at 12:44 p.m. The patient, whose name they learned from the paramedic's secondary report, was Ryan Calloway, 26 years old, construction worker, no next of kin on file, was moved to the OR at 1:07 p.m. with a blood pressure of 98/62 and both lungs doing their jobs. He was alive because of a procedure performed by a volunteer nurse who had then walked out of the trauma bay and gone back to changing dressings in Bay 6. By 2 in the afternoon, the story had made 3 full laps around Mercy General. Hospitals are small ecosystems. What happens in a trauma bay at noon is common knowledge in the cafeteria by 1 and established mythology by 3. The details shift in transit. They always do. But the core of it stays intact, because the core of it was witnessed by enough people to resist revision. A volunteer nurse had walked into an active trauma response uninvited. She had picked up a needle. She had performed a needle decompression with the speed and precision of someone who did not need to think about performing a needle decompression. And then she had told Dr. Marcus Hale, board certified, 9 years practicing, uncle on the board, exactly what needed to happen next, and walked away before he could respond. The details that shifted in transit were mostly about Hale's face during those moments. Everyone who had been in the room agreed on the fact of the expression. They disagreed on what to call it. Kowalski, who had the best angle, said it looked like the moment you realize the person you've been condescending to for a week has been doing you a favor by letting you. One of the trauma nurses said it looked like a man trying very hard not to show that he had just been outclassed in his own house. Donna, who had not been in the room but had been standing in the corridor and had seen Claire walk back out, said it didn't matter what Hale's face looked like. What mattered was Claire's. She looked the same, Donna said to the two nurses listening at the station. Exactly the same as before she went in. Same expression, same walk. Like she'd just gone in to check a blood pressure. This somehow was the detail that traveled farthest, because it was the most unsettling. A person performing under extreme pressure for the first time looks a specific way afterward. Relief, adrenaline crash. The shaky hands that come when the body finally gets permission to react. These are involuntary. They happen to everyone. They had not happened to Claire Mercer. She was in Bay 6, replacing a wound dressing on an elderly woman named Margaret, when Donna found her at 2:15. "People are talking," Donna said quietly, appearing at the bay curtain. "People are always talking," Claire said, without looking up from the dressing. "About you specifically?" "I figured." Donna was quiet for a moment, watching her work. The dressing went on cleanly, precisely. The medical tape cut at exact lengths, the edges sealed without bubbles or gaps. The kind of application that came from repetition, thousands of repetitions maybe, so many that the hands no longer needed instruction from the brain. "Where did you actually learn that?" Donna asked. "The decompression." Claire smoothed the last edge of tape. "I told Dr. Hale." "You told Dr. Hale nursing school." Donna's voice was patient. "Claire, I have been a nurse for 23 years. I have seen exactly 2 people perform a needle decompression at that speed without hesitation in a live trauma. One of them was a former Army doc who spent 8 years forward deployed. The other one just walked out of our trauma bay and is currently redressing Margaret's leg wound." Margaret, who was 71 and had been pretending not to listen, said, "She also has very good hands, dear. You can always tell." Claire almost smiled. She gathered the used dressing materials and disposed of them without answering. Donna waited. "I've had good training," Claire said finally. It was not an answer. They both knew it. Donna accepted it the way you accept a door that is not going to open, not because you stop wondering what's behind it, but because you recognize that pushing harder won't help. "Hale is asking questions," Donna said. Something shifted in Claire's posture. Barely. A millimeter of tension in the shoulders that hadn't been there a second before. What kind of questions? The kind that start with "who is she?" and move toward "where did she come from?" Donna crossed her arms. "He called the volunteer coordinator's office 20 minutes ago, asked for your full file." Claire was quiet. She looked at the supply cart for a moment. Just a moment. "What did they tell him?" "That your paperwork is in order. RN license active. Background check clear. References verified." Donna paused. He wasn't satisfied. Of course he wasn't. Marcus Hale had spent the last 2 hours in a state that was uncomfortable and unfamiliar. The state of having been made to feel small by someone he had categorized as beneath his notice. Men like Hale did not rest in that state. They investigated their way out of it. The problem was that investigating Claire Mercer was going to lead Marcus Hale somewhere he was not prepared to go. She was not ready for that. She pressed her hand flat against the supply cart and thought about the orange bottle in her jacket pocket. 8 weeks ago, her neurologist had used the word degenerative. He had used other words too, manageable and monitored, and we have options. But the word that had stayed, the one that had followed her out of that office and into the cab and up to her apartment and into the first honest silence she had sat in for years, was degenerative. The tremor in her hands, the one people saw every morning, the one that made her look uncertain and fragile and exactly like the woman she needed to appear to be, was not performance. That part was real. It came and went. Worse in the mornings, before the medication took hold. Better by midday. Sometimes absent for hours. Sometimes back without warning. The medication managed it, most of the time. She had come to Mercy General because she needed to do something with her hands, while her body renegotiated the terms of their agreement. Because sitting still had never been something she was built for. Because the particular discipline of nursing, the attention to small things, the presence it demanded, the way it required you to be inside the moment rather than calculating the next one, was, she had discovered, the closest thing to peace she had found since leaving the other life. She had not expected Marcus Hale. She had not expected to care enough about a stranger on a gurney to walk through a door she had promised herself she would stay outside of. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she went back to work. Hale found her at 3:45. She was in the hallway outside the radiology suite, reviewing a chart. When she heard his footsteps, the specific cadence of someone who has decided on a confrontation and is now committed to the approach. She did not look up from the chart. He stopped beside her. She turned a page. Mercer. Dr. Hale. I want to talk to you about what happened in the trauma bay. Ryan Calloway is in recovery. Cardiothoracic said the bullet missed the subclavian by 4 millimeters. He's expected to make a full recovery. She turned another page. You're welcome. A muscle moved in Hale's jaw. That's not what I want to talk about, and you know it. She closed the chart. She looked at him directly for the first time since the trauma bay. His expression was the complicated one, not the contempt from this morning, which had been simple and reflexive, but something that had more layers to it. Frustration, suspicion, and underneath both of those, something that looked almost like the beginning of unease. What do you want to talk about? She asked. Who trained you? I've answered that question. You gave me a non-answer. I gave you an answer you didn't like. His jaw tightened. No one performs a procedure like that without specific advanced training. The grip, the angle, the landmarks. You didn't hesitate for a second. You didn't look for the landmarks. You just knew. He lowered his voice slightly. I've seen that once before, in a simulation lab. And the person running the simulation had 3 combat deployments and a PhD in trauma medicine. Claire looked at him. She kept her expression exactly where she needed it, neutral, slightly tired, the face of a woman who was not going to give him what he was looking for. I'm a very thorough nurse, she said. Stop doing that. Doing what? The thing where you make yourself sound smaller than you are. His voice had shifted. The command had gone out of it, and something more uncertain had taken its place. I've been watching you since this morning. The cardiac catch in Bay 3. The way you handled the Calloway assessment before anyone else in that room had processed the information. The decompression, he paused, and the way you speak to patients, not the clinical part, the other part, the way you talk to them like you've been in rooms with people who were very scared and you know exactly what words to use. She said nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. Your hands were shaking this morning, he said, before the trauma. And then they weren't. During the procedure they were completely steady. And now... His eyes dropped briefly to her hands, which were holding the chart with the slight tremor that had returned, post-medication window, the way it always did in the late afternoon. Now they're shaking again. She kept her face still. I have a condition, she said. It's managed. What kind of condition? The kind that's managed. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it, not warning exactly, but the distinct sense of a boundary being identified. It doesn't affect my patient care. It didn't today. Hale was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face that she didn't expect. It was not calculation. It looked almost like shame. The first edge of it. The early sensation of realizing that the framework you have been operating inside may have been wrong from the beginning. He opened his mouth. Before he could speak, the radio on the wall behind the nurse's station crackled. A voice came through. Dispatch, urgent. The particular frequency of words that precede something large. Mercy General, this is EMS dispatch. Be advised, we have a mass casualty event inbound from the Route 9 interchange. Multiple critical. ETA, 4 minutes. Repeat, mass casualty inbound, 4 minutes. The hallway changed immediately. The sound of the hospital reorganized itself. Voices rising, feet moving faster. The specific acceleration of a building that has shifted from managed chaos into something with higher stakes. Hale turned toward the trauma bay without thinking. Then he stopped. He looked back at Claire. She was already moving, not toward the exit, not toward the break room, toward the trauma bay. Her clipboard was under her arm, her shoulders were back, her chin was level. The tremor in her hands was gone. And her eyes, the gray-blue eyes that had spent 11 days looking at the floor of this hospital, were scanning the corridor ahead of her with a speed and precision that had nothing to do with nursing school, and everything to do with something much older, and much harder, and much farther away than any classroom. Hale watched her go. He stood in the hallway alone for exactly 3 seconds. Then he ran to catch up. The Route 9 interchange had given them 7 patients, 4 critical, 2 unstable, 1 who had stopped being critical by the time the ambulance arrived and was now a different kind of problem entirely. The trauma bay had become a different place. Not louder. Louder was easy. Louder was just noise. This was the particular density of a space where multiple lives were being negotiated simultaneously, where every decision had a cost, and where the people making the decisions had to hold all of it in their heads at once without dropping anything. Claire worked Bay 2. She did not ask for Bay 2. She simply went to it, assessed the patient, a woman in her 40s, blunt abdominal trauma, rigid belly, BP dropping, and began doing what needed to be done with the focused economy of someone who had triaged worse than this before breakfast in places that had no electricity and no backup. Hale watched her from across the room. He was managing Bay 1, his hands busy, his mouth giving orders, but his eyes kept finding her. The way she moved through the bay was wrong, not wrong badly. Wrong in the way that a concert pianist playing a children's recital is wrong. Technically present, technically appropriate, but operating at a frequency the room wasn't built for. She kept doing things 2 seconds before the monitors confirmed she should. She kept positioning herself exactly where she needed to be before the situation developed into the place that required her to be there. At 4:47, Kowalski lost an airway in Bay 3. It happened fast. The patient bucked, the tube dislodged, and the numbers on the monitor went in the direction that makes everyone in the room feel the same thing at the same time. Hale heard it, started to move. Claire was already there. She had a surgical kit open before Kowalski finished his sentence. Her hands found the landmarks at the throat, the cricothyroid membrane, the narrow window between cartilage that is the last door before the door closes permanently. And she made the incision with a steadiness that made 2 nurses take an involuntary step back. Horizontal, clean, exactly 1.5 centimeters. The tube went in. The monitor climbed. She stepped back. The whole thing had taken 31 seconds. Kowalski was staring at her. "Surgical crick," she said to him quietly, not unkindly. "Practice it. You'll need it again." She went back to Bay 2. By 6 in the evening, all 4 critical patients were stable and in surgery or the ICU. The 2 unstable had been upgraded. The documentation was being completed. The trauma bay was being reset. Hale found her in the break room at 6:22. She was sitting with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, her jacket on, the orange prescription bottle on the table in front of her. She was looking at it the way you look at something you have a complicated relationship with. He sat down across from her without asking. She didn't tell him to leave. He put a piece of paper on the table between them. She looked at it. It was a printout. A web page, the alumni directory of Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. His medical school. She could see his name in the list near the bottom, graduation year printed neatly beside it. Above the list was a faculty section. One name was circled in pen, Dr. Claire Mercer, MD, PhD, Director of Tactical Combat Medicine, Department Chair Trauma Surgery, appointed faculty 2009, on leave of absence 2023. He had printed her photograph too. It was a faculty portrait, formal, the kind taken in front of a bookshelf. She looked different in it. Her hair was short. Her posture was the posture from the trauma bay, not the posture from the corridor. Her eyes were looking at the camera, the way they had looked at the airway in Bay 3, like they already knew what was going to happen next. Hale's voice, when he spoke, had lost every layer of authority it had carried this morning. What was left underneath was something younger and considerably less certain. "You were my department chair," he said. She picked up her coffee. "You graduated the year I took sabbatical," she said. "We never met in person." "You wrote my recommendation letter," he said, "for my residency. I read it 100 times. A pause. "I had it framed." She said nothing. "You were the reason I applied to emergency medicine." His voice was very quiet now. "The papers you published on tactical trauma protocols. I wrote my entire personal statement around your research." She set the coffee down. She looked at him across the table. And Dr. Marcus Hale, 34 years old, board certified, uncle on the board, looked back at her with the face of a man who had spent the day humiliating the person who had built the foundation everything he knew was standing on. Claire picked up the prescription bottle. She put it in her jacket pocket. She stood up. "Get some rest, Dr. Hale," she said. "You did good work today." She walked out. He sat at the table alone. The printout was still in front of him. He did not move for a very long time. The night shift at Mercy General began at 7. By 7:15, the ER had settled into the particular rhythm of an evening that follows a hard afternoon, slower, quieter, the kind of quiet that feels earned. The overhead fluorescents hummed at their usual frequency. The monitors beeped at appropriate intervals. The overnight staff moved through their routines with the careful efficiency of people conserving energy for whatever the night decided to send their way. Claire was still there. She had not been scheduled past 6. She had not been asked to stay. She had simply not left, which was consistent with the 11 days that had preceded it, and nobody questioned it because nobody ever questioned the person who stayed. She was at the nurse's station reviewing discharge paperwork when the elevator at the end of the corridor opened. She did not look up. But something in her changed. It was not a visible thing. Not the shoulders, not the hands, not the expression. It was something interior. A shift in the quality of attention. The way a room changes when a window opens even before the air moves. She had spent 14 years learning to feel the presence of things that hadn't announced themselves yet. She felt this one. She looked up. 3 men had come off the elevator. Civilian clothes. Clean. Expensive in the specific way that people spend money when they want to look like they aren't spending money. One carried a laptop bag. One had his hands in his pockets. The third was slightly ahead of the other two, and he moved through the corridor with the particular quality of a man who was accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room he entered. She recognized the quality. She did not recognize the faces. That was the part that mattered. She set down the discharge paperwork. She watched them approach the nursing station. The one in front, mid-40s, wide through the shoulders, a jaw that had absorbed some history, produced a credentials wallet and held it open for the charge nurse on duty. Claire was 6 feet away. She read the badge in the credentials wallet without appearing to look at it. Defense Intelligence Agency. The charge nurse, a young man named Torres who had been on shift for 2 hours and had the energy of someone who had not yet been worn down by the specific gravity of this particular night, said, "Can I help you, sir?" "We're here to see a patient," the man said. "Ryan Calloway, room 412. Torres typed something. "Mr. Calloway is in the ICU, post-surgical. Visiting hours for that unit are..." "We're not visitors," the man said. "We're his people." Torres looked uncertain in the way that young people look uncertain when authority presents itself in a form the training didn't cover. Claire picked up a chart from the station. She began walking, not toward the elevator, not away from the men. She walked parallel to their trajectory, at the unhurried pace of a nurse doing exactly what nurses do at 7:30 in the evening, and she listened to every word of the conversation as she passed. She heard the name the lead agent gave Torres. She heard the secondary name he gave when Torres asked for a point of contact. She heard the third thing, not a name, a phrase, spoken quietly to the agent behind him when he thought the distance was sufficient. It wasn't. She had trained in rooms where the distance was never sufficient. She kept walking. Around the corner, out of sightline, she stopped. She stood with the chart open in front of her, and she thought very quickly and very clearly about what she had just heard. Ryan Calloway was not a construction worker. Or, he was not only a construction worker. The name the agent had given Torres was clean. The secondary contact was clean. But the phrase, 3 words, spoken to the man behind him, was not the language of a welfare check on a civilian trauma patient. It was operational shorthand, the kind that existed in a lexicon shared by a specific community of people who did not announce their membership. She knew the shorthand because she had used it. For 14 years, she put the chart down on the nearest surface. She thought about what that meant. Calloway was an asset, or an operator, or both. And the 3 men from the elevator were not here for a welfare visit. They were here to assess whether whatever Calloway knew, or was or had been doing before a bullet put him in Bay 1, had been compromised by the fact that he had spent the last several hours being treated by civilian medical staff at a public hospital. Which meant they were going to want to know who had treated him. Which meant they were going to want to know who had performed the procedure that kept him alive long enough to reach the OR. Which meant they were going to find her file. And her file, the file that said, Claire Mercer, RN, volunteer, references verified, background check clear, was a very good file. She had made sure of it. But it was a file built for casual inspection, not for the kind of institutional pull that 3 DIA agents could make with a single phone call. She had approximately 40 minutes before that phone call produced something she was not ready to explain. She picked the chart back up. She made a decision. She went to find Donna. Donna was in the supply room off the main corridor, doing inventory with the kind of mechanical thoroughness that indicated she was thinking about something other than inventory. Claire stepped inside and closed the door. Donna looked at her. The 3 men who just came off the elevator, Claire said quietly. Do not let them access Calloway's treatment record without going through legal first. Tell Torres the same thing, federal credentials or not. Any patient record release requires authorization through the hospital's legal department. It's policy. It's also true. Donna stared at her. Claire, it buys time. That's all I need. Time for what? Claire looked at her steadily. Donna, do you trust me? A pause. The kind that contains more thought than its length suggests. Yes, Donna said. Then do that one thing. That's all. She left the supply room. She went to the stairwell. She took the stairs to the 4th floor, which is where the ICU was, and where Ryan Calloway was in a bed with monitors telling his story in numbers, and where she needed to be before the 3 men from the elevator got past Torres and the institutional friction of a legal department that was going to take at least 40 minutes to reach at this hour. She pushed open the stairwell door. The ICU corridor was quieter than the ER. Hushed in the particular way of places where the margin is thin, and everyone who works there has agreed without discussion to keep the noise low, out of respect for what thin margins require. The charge nurse at the ICU station was a woman named Park, efficient, experienced, not easily redirected. I need to check in on Calloway, Claire said. Dr. Hale asked me to verify his post-op vitals before the evening attending does rounds. It was not entirely a lie. Hale had, in fact, looked at her with an expression before she left the break room that contained, among the shame and the silence, a kind of implicit deference that she had chosen to interpret as broadly as the situation required. Park looked at her badge, then at the computer, then back at her. 5 minutes, Park said. Claire went in. Ryan Calloway was asleep. The surgery had been long and technically complex, and his body was doing the work that bodies do after they have been asked to absorb something catastrophic and then repair themselves. The slow, serious, cellular-level labor of putting things back. His color was better than it had been on the gurney, His chest rose and fell in the even rhythm of someone whose lungs were doing what lungs were supposed to do. Claire stood at the foot of his bed for a moment. She checked his chart. His vitals were stable. His surgical notes were thorough. The cardiothoracic team had done excellent work. She set the chart back. She looked at his left hand, the pale ring of skin where the sun hadn't touched. She thought about what it meant to be someone whose existence required careful management, whose life had a version visible to the world and a version underneath, and whose survival sometimes depended on which version the wrong people saw first. She understood that better than most. She pulled a chair to the bedside and sat, not because she needed to sit, because she needed to be in the room when what was coming came. She did not wait long. At 8:14, the door of the ICU room opened. The lead agent stepped inside. He saw her immediately. He stopped. His hand went briefly, instinctively, to his left side, and then stopped there, because he was in a hospital in a civilian city, and the instinct had nowhere useful to go. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. "You're Mercer," he said. "I'm his nurse," she said. "That's not what I asked." She stood up slowly from the chair. And here is the thing about standing up slowly when you have spent 14 years learning how rooms work. It does not look slow. It looks deliberate. It looks like the opposite of someone rising because they have been asked to. It looks like someone who has decided, on their own timeline, that the moment has come. She faced him. The agent was good at his job. She could see it in the way he was standing, the way his eyes moved through the room, the way he had entered without fully closing the door because he knew that partially closed doors give you information that closed doors don't. He had done this a long time. He looked at her the way people look at something when they are trying to reconcile two versions of it. "You performed the decompression," he said. "I did." That's not in his official treatment record yet. The attending listed it as trauma team intervention. His voice was neutral, professional. "Someone was protecting you." She said nothing. He took a step closer, not threatening, assessing. "We're going to need to understand who you are," he said, "before we can determine whether this patient's cover is intact." "His cover is intact," she said. "I knew what he was before I touched him. I did not document anything that would indicate otherwise. His chart reads as a civilian GSW, standard trauma presentation, standard intervention, standard post-op. There is nothing in the record of this hospital that points to anything other than a construction worker who was in the wrong place." The agent was very still. "How did you know what he was?" he asked. She held his gaze. "Because I recognized the field dressing on his wound," she said. "The technique, the specific packing method. It's not taught in civilian EMT courses. It's not in any public protocol. I've seen it exactly one place." He waited. "Coronado," she said. The name of the Naval Special Warfare Center landed in the room quietly. The agent's expression did not change, but his posture did. It was a very small thing, a fraction of an adjustment in the set of his shoulders. The kind of micro-recalibration that happens when a person's nervous system receives information that updates its assessment of what it is dealing with. "You were stationed at Coronado," he said. It was not a question. "I was faculty at the Naval Special Warfare Medical Training Unit for 6 years, she said. "Before that, 3 deployments. Before that, surgical residency at Bethesda. Before that," she paused. "Before that was a long time ago." The agent looked at her. "Commander Mercer," he said quietly. Her rank, her actual rank, the one that had not appeared on any document in this hospital. The one she had set down the way you set down something heavy after carrying it further than you planned. She did not correct him. She did not confirm him either. "His cover is intact," she said again. "He's going to be fine. The subclavian is clear. The lung is re-expanded, and the surgical team does not know anything they should not know. You can stand your people down." He looked at her for a long time. Then he took one step back. He reached into the laptop bag carried by the agent in the doorway. He produced a card and held it out. She took it. She looked at it once, briefly, and then put it in her jacket pocket next to the orange prescription bottle. "If your situation changes," the agent said. "I know where to find you," she said. He nodded once. He left. The door closed. Claire stood alone in the room with the sound of Ryan Calloway breathing and the monitors telling his steady, improving story in green numbers on black screens. She sat back down in the chair. She put her hands in her lap. They were not shaking. She looked at the window at the end of the room, the city beyond it, indifferent and enormous and full of people who would never know how many versions of safety were maintained on their behalf by people who wore the wrong clothes for it. She thought about the card in her pocket. She thought about the prescription bottle next to it. She thought about a word a neurologist had used 8 weeks ago: degenerative. She thought about a room at Coronado, the large one, the one that looked out over the water, where she had stood in front of 42 candidates on the first day of a training cycle and said the same thing she said at the start of every cycle. This training will ask you to find out what you are made of. The answer is not what you expect. The answer is always more. She sat with that for a moment. Then she stood up. She smoothed her scrubs. She went back to work. The story broke at 6 in the morning. Not the story Claire would have chosen. Not the story anyone at Mercy General would have predicted 48 hours earlier. But stories have a way of finding their own shape. A local news crew had been at the Route 9 interchange the afternoon of the mass casualty event. Standard coverage. Accident, injuries, emergency response, routine footage, except that one of the camera operators had followed the ambulances to Mercy General, and one of those cameras had caught, through the glass doors of the trauma bay, a partial view of what happened inside. A nurse, moving with a speed and precision that did not belong in the frame. The footage was 34 seconds long. By morning, it had been viewed 4 million times. By 9 a.m., 3 national networks had crews outside Mercy General. By 10, the hospital's communications director had called an emergency meeting. By 10:45, Dr. Marcus Hale had asked to make a statement. Nobody expected that. Claire was in the break room when Donna found her. "Hale is going to speak to the press," Donna said. Her voice had the specific quality of someone delivering information they do not fully understand yet. Claire looked up from her coffee. "About the mass casualty response," Donna continued. "He asked communications to set up outside. Full press. He specifically said," she paused. "He said he had something he needed to say publicly." Claire was quiet. She looked at the window. Then she stood up, straightened her scrubs and said, "Where?" The hospital's main entrance had been reorganized into something that resembled, improbably, a press briefing. Cameras, microphones. The communications director looking like a man who had agreed to something without fully understanding what he had agreed to. Hospital staff had gathered at the edges, nurses, residents, administrators. Some had come down from upper floors. Word had traveled the way word traveled at Mercy General, fast and thorough, arriving before the official announcement. Claire stood at the back of the crowd. She did not push forward. She watched. Hale came out through the main doors at 11 o'clock. He was not wearing his white coat. That was the first thing she noticed. The white coat that was always pressed, always present, always part of the architecture of how he occupied a room. It was absent. He was in his scrubs. The same scrubs he had been wearing since the mass casualty call came in, because she suspected he had not gone home. He looked like a man who had spent the night with something uncomfortable and had decided, by morning, to stop fighting it. He stepped up to the microphone cluster. He looked at the cameras, and then he looked at the crowd of hospital staff. He found her. She did not look away. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then he began. "2 days ago," he said, "a woman was humiliated in this hospital, in public, in front of her colleagues, by me." The communications director went very still. The cameras kept rolling. I struck a clipboard out of her hands with enough force to scatter her work across the floor. I spoke to her in a way that no person should speak to another. I did it because I had decided, without evidence and without decency, that she was beneath my notice. He paused. I was wrong. About all of it. The crowd was absolutely silent. What I did not know, what I had no right to assume I knew, was who she was. Not because it would have changed my basic obligation to treat another human being with respect. It shouldn't have required knowing. But I want to say it publicly, because she deserves to have it said publicly. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back up. Her name is Dr. Claire Mercer. Commander Claire Mercer, United States Navy. She holds a medical degree and a PhD in trauma surgery. She served 3 combat deployments. She spent 6 years as faculty at the Naval Special Warfare Medical Training Unit at Coronado, where she trained some of the most elite combat medics this country has ever produced. He stopped. She was also, for 4 years, the department chair of trauma surgery at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, where I went to medical school, where I learned everything I know about emergency medicine, where she wrote the recommendation letter that got me my residency. A murmur moved through the crowd. He did not let it build. I did not recognize her. I had never met her in person. I knew her name from papers I had read so many times the pages were soft. From a letter she wrote about a student she had never met, based on his work alone, with a generosity I did not earn, and have spent 9 years trying to deserve. His voice was steady, but it was costing him something. And then she walked into my hospital, and I threw her work on the floor. He paused. 2 days ago, in this building, she performed a needle decompression that saved a man's life. She performed a surgical cricothyrotomy in 31 seconds. She triaged a mass casualty event with a command presence that I have seen in exactly no one else in 9 years of emergency medicine. She did all of it quietly, without recognition, without complaint, in oversized scrubs, with a name tag most of us had stopped reading. He looked directly at the cameras. She is here today as a volunteer because she was recently diagnosed with a neurological condition. She came to this hospital not because she needed something from us. She came because she does not know how to stop working for other people, because that is who she is at her absolute core, someone who shows up, someone who stays. His jaw tightened briefly, and I met her by throwing her work on the floor and telling her she didn't have the right to think. He turned. He looked at Claire. She had not moved from the back of the crowd. The cameras found her. She did not acknowledge them. She looked at Hale the way she looked at everything that required her full attention, directly, without performance, with the specific quality of someone who is truly present in a moment, rather than watching themselves be present in it. "Dr. Mercer," he said. His voice had dropped, still audible through the microphones, but meant for her. "I am sorry. Not for the cameras, not for the lawyers, for you. Because what I did was wrong, and you responded to it with a dignity I did not deserve and have not stopped thinking about since." He paused. "You are the greatest doctor I have ever seen work. You were the foundation I built everything on before I knew your face. And you are the reason, the specific, humbling, irreversible reason, that I will spend the rest of my career trying to be worthy of the field you helped build." He stepped back from the microphones. The crowd was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than silence usually does. And then Donna started clapping. Not the polished, coordinated applause of a managed public moment, the real kind. The kind that starts in one pair of hands because the person attached to those hands cannot hold it any longer, and then moves outward because truth, when it finally arrives in a room, tends to pull people toward it. The staff applauded. The press applauded. Someone near the front was crying, and not particularly hiding it. Claire stood in the back of the crowd. She did not cry. She stood with her hands at her sides, her scrubs slightly wrinkled from a day and a half of continuous wear. Her dirty blonde hair half escaped from a bun she had never quite learned to do properly, and she looked at Marcus Hale the way you look at something that has surprised you, not by being extraordinary, but by being, finally, honest. She held his gaze. She gave him one slow nod. Then she turned around and walked back into the hospital. There was work to do. There was always work to do. She passed Gerald's Bay on the way to the nurse's station. He was awake, sitting up, his laceration healing cleanly. He was showing a photograph on his phone to a young orderly who was politely pretending to be more interested in a dog named Biscuit than he probably was. She paused at the doorway. "Biscuit doing okay?" she asked. Gerald looked up. His face arranged itself into something warm and uncomplicated. "Neighbor's got him," he said. "She says he ate her throw pillow." "Sounds healthy," Claire said. She moved on. At the nurse's station, she picked up a chart. She checked the name. Bay 4. New admit. Overnight. 68 years old, chest pain that had been downgraded to musculoskeletal, but was reading wrong to her in the same way that Bay 3 had read wrong yesterday morning. She took the chart and walked toward the bay. In her jacket pocket, the orange prescription bottle made its small sound with each step. And in the other pocket, next to it, the card the DIA agent had left. She had not thrown it away. She had not called the number on it. She had not decided anything, because deciding things required a kind of certainty that her neurologist had politely removed from the table 8 weeks ago when he used the word degenerative in a sentence that had her name in it. But she had not thrown it away. She pushed back the bay curtain. The 68-year-old man inside looked up at her with the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for someone to actually see him. She pulled up a chair. She sat down. "Tell me where it hurts," she said, "and take your time." Outside, the cameras were still rolling. Inside, Claire Mercer was doing what she had always done. She was listening. She was staying. She was enough. The end. If this story stayed with you, if Claire's quiet strength hit something real, hit that like button and let it be seen. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us here at Secrets of Silent Badges. Every story we tell is about someone who was never supposed to be seen, until they were. We'll see you in the next one.